Salam again, everybody. This is yet another episode, the fourth episode of our African journey. Welcome again, and thank you for those who are still following us on YouTube. Kindly continue subscribing and also liking as you continue to view and learn. I am so happy because so far we have delved into a history of a person's experience, somebody who lived the experience. So this is not just semantics, and we shall continue from where we stopped last time. I had mentioned that the liberation movement in Kenya, and especially among the Karing'a nation, or rather the Kikuyu nation, began with the walking out of some of the members who had converted into Christianity through missionaries in protest of oppression, being undermined, and their dignity was not observed. And so a lot of questions about the kind of God that Christianity was perpetuating in Africa are some of the questions that were emerging. And those who never converted into Christianity continued with the African traditional religion, practices and beliefs, and they were the people who were always confronting the converts and those who were educated with a Western education. And they were called Adhomi. And these Adhomis are the brains behind the liberation movement, together with those who had fought in the First World War, in quotes, which I'd like to call it the West versus East and versus Far East War, both the first and second. Those from Africa who had participated in these wars had gained military experience, and they had an expertise in using rifles. And so when they came back, they found the religious circle had already started liberation, which according to my notes, it started around 1910, 10 years or thereabout before the introduction of Kipande, and around 18 years before the introduction of the heart taxes and the labor taxes or income taxes. In this turn of the 20th century, a lot of things really happened. Education had begun in the missions, and this is the core of our discussion, the kind of education that our people received and the purpose of that education, which was to brainwash people. And the promise of the same education for people to get employment, the same challenges we're facing today, the same challenges that were there back then. But back then, there was also the question of loyalty. How loyal are you to the colonial system? And so the divide and rule continued, and people were supposed to take sides. Africans were pitted against their own families, their own relatives, their own friends, childhood friends, because it was a question of allegiance. And so when these liberation movements that sparked all together from 1910 when Athomi, the convert Africans who were educated, really questioned the representation of Africans in the Christian meetings that were making decisive, were making very important decisions in as far as the future of mission and church and conversion and education was concerned. And so from 1901 all through to 1910, that was the question among the Athomis. And by the time the missionaries giving them an ear, it was around 1913. And so few people were welcomed in the meetings, but that was not enough. And so this is when in 1913 the liberation movements began, and the Karing'a concept as a philosophy, as an ideology, and as a principle was carried by both convert Christians who walked away from the missionary churches, and those who had not converted into Christianity found a home. And in a derogative history that is taught in our universities and primaries and secondary schools, they say that these people walked out in protest of the ban of FGM. FGM was a cultural practice, and it was an initiation that led to a marriage of a young lady. Now, if you look at the traditions, even among the Hebrews, young ladies as young as 13 years to 16 years were married off. Now in Africa, because this is the sexually active stage, the reason why FGM was carried was to try and control the sexual urge before a lady was given off in marriage. Now, was it bad? Traditionally, according to the standards of living and the exposure back then, this was the norm. And since it had a value of preserving virginity, and this is when a lady was taught how to become a wife, and the awareness of becoming a woman was taught here in an open African schooling system. Now, the Europeans had to disrupt. Today, ladies are not married off at a young age. They are married off after they finish university at around 20, 25 years. And sometimes it is a personal decision. Today, it may not hold a lot of value because a lot has changed. Ladies choose when to be married. Now it's not the parents dictating. And so these kind of freedoms are what we enjoy. But remember, these freedoms would not have been there if we had not fought for our liberation, because we would be slaves even today. Whether FGM was practiced or not, we will be slaves in our own country, just like the Aboriginal and also the Red Indians, both in Australia and in the Americas, respectively. The idea of the Jewish traditional religion being entrenched into Christianity, it was borrowed by the church fathers, and it was borrowed because Christ lived partly or most of his life as a Jew, and so he practiced Judaism. And so a departure from Old Testament through intertestamental period and the New Testament is also the same process that will have been used by the missionaries when they introduced Christianity, because Christianity in essence is just a message, a good news of eternal life, not condemnation after death, but eternal life after death. And message can never be effective if it has not been grafted in the culture of the people. And this is where the missionaries went wrong. A lot of things and strategies and remedies have been proposed by African scholars, including inculturation, including indigenization, and so on and so forth. But I am proud Christian from an African instituted church, and it is our responsibility now that we are having our people being educated to go back and look at the philosophy, the ideology, and the principle of our forefathers who rejected the Western missionary, and they had in their mystical belief that there is another form of Christianity out there. And that's when in 1930, when Mzee Jomo Kenyatta was leaving for England, this was asked the founding father before he became the president. When you go to England, because they contributed money for this cause, when you reach there, get us a priest who boasts of his faith, like the Roman Catholic missionary. And this is after they came up with the conclusion that there is no a missionary and there is no a colonial master. Both are one and the same. In Kikuyu, they said, Utire movea kana mudhogo. And this was another clarion call for cementing the Karing'a clarion call. And this was the second chapter of the Karing'a in the making, and making a nation. But this time, because nationalism had expanded from an ethnic community to inter-ethnic communities, so the clarion call became an awakening call for most Christians who were in the missionary churches and those who had not converted. But it was not about conversion. It was about coming together as Africans and defending our dignity, our peace, and our justice. When one of the bishop of African Orthodox Church was passing through from West Indies and was passing through Mombasa, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta had left a message to a gentleman called James Boothia, a man who was suffering from identity crisis, and he had changed his name, the African name Boothia, to Buta. So he was known as James Buta. He diligently gave the message to this priest, and this priest was en route to Uganda, and he said, tell them to prepare an accommodation for me, to prepare my bills, my traveling bills, and to prepare the facilitation of an educational program which will take about 6 months, and then I will ordain the priests. And so it happened. After he left Uganda in 1932, he went back to New York, to Boston, and he left the African Orthodox Church of America to form his own African Orthodox Church of South Africa. And his purpose and mission, the purpose of the church and mission of his ministry, was to empower and to accept those who were chased away from the missionary, the Western missionary churches and schools, and to form an African faith through an Orthodox faith. And this is where we are in 1933, 1934 he came. He went to a place called Mukoroeine, where all the Kikuyus hail from, and a seminary was set up. Candidates were chosen, and they were taught and ordained. Among the people who were ordained was Father George Gadhuna Wandongo, there was Philip Kiande, and there was Daudi Maina. These were the first African Orthodox priests who were under Karing'a Independent Pentecostal Association movements. And we'll reach there today, and I'm happy because we are going step by step, and I hope we are all understanding where we are heading with this. Next chapter or the next episode, we shall focus on the biblical journey of Africans, so that we can be able to demystify the wrong notion of Africans as a caste nation, propaganda that was spread through Hebrews and through the Old Testament. We shall be empowering even pastors who have wrongly accused themselves without even realizing that they are the fathers of all races. Be good and be kind to yourself. See you soon.